Hello, very warm good morning to all of you and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Welcome to today's the Hindu Newspaper Analysis, where today we shall be discussing 5 important topics which have appeared in the newspaper, the Delhi edition of the Hindu today. We shall be discussing where they appeared, what is the importance of those articles, what kind of questions can be asked from those articles, be it from the prelims perspective or from the mains point of view. We shall be analyzing those articles in a significant detail. And after that, after the session has been conducted, there will be a quiz which shall be uploaded on our Telegram channel. I request and suggest all of you to do attend that quiz in order to understand that how much you have actually understood in the whole of the analysis. So without further ado, let us initiate our discussion. First of all, taking a look at the topics that we are going to discuss today. So first of all, we are going to discuss the articles which have appeared in the editorial pieces. So starting with the first article, that is the spirit of the law lies in the dissenting judgment. And here dissenting judgment by whom? What judgment are we talking about? That is something which we are going to discuss about. This is for GS2, very, very relevant for your GS2 paper. And it has appeared in page 6 of the Delhi edition. After that, we shall be analyzing a portion from GS paper 3, that is Indo-US Space Cooperation, GS paper 3, right? And what are the issues in that space cooperation which is in a way inhibiting us to achieve and reach the heights that Indo-US Space Cooperation deserves. Then after that, a piece from the editorial pages again, that is in page 7, again relevant for your GS paper 3. That is about economy. And here, service forms on recovery path, manufacturing still a concern based upon RBI's survey and the data released by RBI. Then, demand for a greater Tipraland by TIPRA Motha, a party, and that too in the state of Tripura, which is in a lot of news due to the forthcoming elections which are going to be conducted in the state. This again will be relevant for your GS paper 2. And then, after that, at the end, we will discuss a minor and a small topic which has appeared in the front page, that is 4G in name only, data needles stutter in grey spots in India. So we shall be trying to analyze what do we mean by these grey spots. So these will be again relevant for your GS paper 3. We shall be analyzing what do we mean by grey spots, what are white spots when it comes to telecommunication. That is something we shall be analyzing in slightly greater detail. So, starting with the first topic of the day, that is the spirit of the law lies in this dissenting judgment. Here, pay attention to this term, this dissenting judgment. And here, the name in itself, without looking at the article, this itself tells you that there must have been a judgment in place where one of the judges would have agreed to dissent, right? So they would not have agreed to the judgment. So that dissenting judgment, that in fact marks the spirit of the law. So that is something that we are going to analyze it. Here, this deals with the fundamental rights of the individuals and also fundamental rights of the communities and group of people when it comes to taking care of their own religion. So, without further ado, first of all, let us take a look at the context and the background due to which this topic has been in discussion. So, on Friday, that is 10th of February 2023, you had a judgment whereby the entire case for Dawoodi Bohra community leaders, that was basically transferred to a larger bench. Now this basic judgment was issued on February 10th, 2023. Now this judgment which was issued, it referred to the entire aspect of excommunication of Dawoodi Bohra member community members from the group. Let us understand and analyze this complicated aspect of it. So what happened, why it happened, and what are the facets of it. So without anything else, first of all, if you take a look into it, so on February 10th, 2023, The court, through Justice A.S. Oka's judgment, and what was that judgment? Central Board of Dawoodi Bohra Community versus the State of Maharashtra, agreed that it merited a reconsideration of the previous judgment on certain counts. And the previous judgment which was made by the Supreme Court itself, that was something which was referred to a larger bench. Now, what was this previous judgment? So the previous judgment that you saw on your screen, that is in the first slide itself, that is in 1962, way back in 1962, the Supreme Court of India, through a 4-1 ruling, means what? 4 of the judges, they agreed to the judgment. One judge, he actually made a dissent note. So out of the total 5 judges, you had 4 in agreement and 1 in dissent. And what was the case? The case at hand was regarding individual freedom in the case of Sardar Sayyidna Tahir Saifuddin versus the state of Bombay. Now, what was this case about? As per this case and as per the petition, it was argued that whether the head of that community, that is the Dai-ul Mutlaq, the head of that community, whether that head person has got the rights within the purview of that community to excommunicate a member from that community. And what do we mean by excommunicating a member? That basically refers to a kind of a social ostracization, or in a way you disband or disbar a particular member from that community. That member is no longer considered to be a part of that community anymore. So if suppose you have a religious community, one particular individual, let's say, as per the head of that community, that particular individual is not fulfilling his duties or has veered away from the path as dictated by that community, that member can be excommunicated. So that was the plea agreement or the plea argument which was made in the court, that whether the head, he has got the power within himself to excommunicate a member or not, right? So in this case, or in this case which was taken to the Supreme Court, the court issued its judgment, and thereby this agreement, or rather argument which was made, was based on the Bombay Prevention of Excommunication Act 1949. So when the 4 judges, they made their judgment, they said that look, this particular act, that is the Bombay Prevention of Excommunication Act 1949, that does not stand to be valid. Why? Because as per their argument, the Dawoodi Bohra community members, they themselves have the right to decide how their religious practices are to be followed. And these members have the right to decide how to conduct the practices, and also the right to ensure whether a particular individual will be a part of that community or not. However, in this, the Chief Justice of India at that point of time, B.P. Sinha, he made a dissenting argument and a dissenting judgment. Hence the 4:1 ratio that you see. The 4 judges, they agreed to it in the sense that they termed that act as null and void, whereas the Chief Justice, he said that look, I am in dissent of this, and we will take a look into the matter as well, that why is it that Chief Justice issued such a very strong dissenting note. It held that the Dai's power to excommunicate was so essential, that is, the Supreme Court's judgment held. The Supreme Court's judgment held that the Dai's power to excommunicate was so essential to the group's faith that a legislation, which legislation are we talking about? We are talking about the Bombay Prevention of Excommunication Act. And this act was basically passed in order to prevent any kind of social boycott which is meted out to any individual out there in the society. Because social boycott is never healthy. When you boycott an individual from all the social activities, eventually that individual's rights, justice, equality, all those things, that simply is thrown out of the window. There are many disadvantages upon the basic rights of the individual, and they are infringed when an individual goes for social boycott. So in order to prevent that, the Bombay Act or the Bombay Excommunication Act 1949 was passed. However, the Supreme Court at that point of time held that a legislation, that is that particular act, in the name of social welfare, cannot be allowed to reform a religion out of its existence. Meaning what? Meaning that even though the act has got a larger goal of a social welfare, they in no circumstances, or they cannot under any conditions, they cannot reform a religion, and they cannot take an issue whereby the essential practices of the religion, they themselves are removed. So that was the argument. And it is a 1961 case, right? With only the Chief Justice of India, he was the only one who opposed that view. But where does all this argument drive from? Where is it driven from? It is driven from Article 26 of the Constitution. Article 26 also talks about religious freedom. And here, it talks about the religious freedom at the level of the groups, right? So freedom to manage religious affairs subject to public order, morality, and health, every religious denomination or any section thereof shall have the right to establish and maintain institutions for religious and charitable purposes, to manage its own affairs in matters of religion, to own and acquire movable and immovable property, and to administer such property in accordance with law. So it is that B, 26B, right? Under 26B, organizations or institutions, they are given a kind of a freedom in order to be able to manage their own religious practices, right? To manage its own affairs in matter of religion, right? So they are ethically independent. So it was based upon this aspect, that is 26B, where most of the judges, they drove their opinion. Having said that, then why is it then when all the judges, they voiced their opinion that, okay, as per Article 26B, it is okay for the head of the community to excommunicate anyone out there, out from the community, to socially ostracize them, then how come from that position did Justice Oka on 10th of February refer the same issue to the larger bench for reconsideration? Why is it that there has been a need which is felt for this to be reconsidered? The answer is very simple. First of all, when we talk about this religious freedom of larger groups and larger communities, you have to understand that there are various different levels of freedom. One is the freedom enjoyed by the religious groups, the larger groupings and the organizations. And the second level of religious freedom that we are talking about at an individual level. Because we have to always remember that the individuals themselves, they also have the right, especially as per Article 21, the right to life, isn't it? Right to life with dignity. So, are we having a perfect balance between those religious groups and the rights given to them and the individual rights? That needs to be weighed upon. And thereby, we need to take a decision whether there can be a further thinking upon this process or not. But there must be a question coming into your mind is that why is it that the Supreme Court is considering this again? The same issue again and again? Why is it that the Supreme Court is considering it again? Because another plea has been argued in the Supreme Court, whereby it has been argued that, look, there has been a relevant and a more contemporary act which has been passed, that is the Maharashtra Protection of People from Social Boycott Act 2016. That is the act which has been passed. Maharashtra Protection of People from Boycott Act 2016. So as per the provisions of this act, any individual needs to be protected from a kind of a social boycott, because we have talked about the ill impacts of the social boycott not only on the individual but on the psyche and the mentality of the entire community itself. So that is where, as per the regulations of this act, an individual needs to be protected from it. Wherever such kinds of social boycotts are taking place, that needs to be stopped immediately. Now, this again stood in the way of that earlier Supreme Court judgment which allowed the head of the Dawoodi Bohra community to excommunicate anyone that he or she desired, isn't it? So thereby, this act again was taken up to the realm of the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court in its hearing referred it to the larger bench that examined this act and the provisions of the earlier judgment on two aspects. One of the aspect regarding the religious denominations and their rights and the individual rights, and the second argument regarding the constitutional morality. That are we following constitutional morality? Now, where does this term morality stem from or originate from? Here, again, its genesis is touted from Article 26 itself. Because in Article 26, if you look at the first statement, here, manage religious affairs subject, that is conditional, to public order, morality, and health. Now here, this morality does not refer to customary morality or traditional morality that you have been or a community has been following for a long time, but rather it refers to the constitutional morality. That are we vitiating any rights of any individual involved in the name of providing a larger religious freedom to a larger religious denomination. So, due to these two factors and based upon these two factors, it has been sent for reconsideration. Now, this is not the first time that Supreme Court is deliberating upon a kind of a religious freedom and infringement of individual rights and essential practices as well. Because way back in the Shirur Mutt case in 1954, the Supreme Court famously held that it was only those aspects of religion which are essential to faith, essential, absolutely important practices that deserve constitutional protection. Determining what is essential, what is not essential, in that case, the court ruled, would depend upon what the devotees of the faith deemed to be essential. So in a way, Supreme Court said that, look, any of the practices that you follow under any religious practices or in any case of a sect or a grouping together, it can be considered essential, and only the essential ones, they will be given constitutional safeguard. Now, how do we decide what is essential? Based upon the devotees and their belief system, their traditional belief system. Now, in a way, this laid a path which was clear for all the individuals that, look, essential practices will be protected. But then the gray line lied, or the gray area lied in determining what is essential, what is not essential. Even till today, you will find a lot of debate, a lot of discussion evolving around the essential practices, isn't it? For example, recently in the hijab controversy, again you would have read upon the essential practices for any religion. Now, things started being taken to the Supreme Court, and as you can see, since 1954 itself, Supreme Court has been flooded with various different issues, requests and directives to discuss what are the essential practices under various different sects and religions. It became to the point of mockery, where each and everything was taken to the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court, rather than being a court of justice, was basically turned into a kind of a theological authority. What do we mean by theological authority? Means someone who will give you the idea about what needs to be followed as per the tenets of the religion, what does any particular religion dictate, and so on. Now, that is not the work of the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court, due to this judgment that the essential practices will be decided by the devotees, was flooded with many such requests. As a result of that, you had certain kinds of judgments which were not taken by the public in the best of the opinion and in the best of the light. For example, a very famous case which has been cited in the article is the famous Tandav dance. Tandava dance, which is conducted by the Ananda Margis. Now, in this case, the Supreme Court discussed and Supreme Court basically opined that this Tandava dance, which is conducted, that is not essential to the religious practices. However, the head of the sect in this case had opined that it is an essential part of the religious practice of this denomination. Despite that fact, Supreme Court came up with a kind of an opinion that no, this Tandava dance, we don't consider it to be essential. Now then, who is to decide? This is where the dissenting note which was given by the Chief Justice of India at that point of time, that is B.P. Sinha. B.P. Sinha made a very important argument. And B.P. Sinha, while writing his dissent note, he had said that, look, it is immaterial to think about the fact that whether the head of that community has got the power or not. What you have to think upon is what will be the impact on the individual once that individual is excommunicated from the entire community. Again, I will repeat the meaning of excommunicated. Ostracization, social ostracization, or a kind of exclusion. So, if an individual is excluded from that community, what will be the impact on that individual? And whether his or her rights, they will be impacted or not. That is something that we have to discuss about. The question is not about the group's religious freedom. That is what B.P. Sinha had said. Now, individual rights we are talking about. So, for example, imagine an individual who has been excommunicated from the organization, from the community, from the religious sect, and so on. Now, immediately when that individual is excommunicated, first of all, he will lose access to the community mosque and the community burial grounds. In the case of the Dawoodi Bohra community that we are discussing, they would lose access to those particular basic things. Also, these people would not be made a part of any social or religious gathering. Thereby, it would lead to a complete social boycott. And that, as per the Chief Justice B.P. Sinha, that basically stood on the verge of untouchability. So as per the opinion of B.P. Sinha, this also in a way vitiated Article 17 of the Constitution. Article 17 deals with what? Untouchability, prevention of untouchability, isn't it? So, as per B.P. Sinha, it was argued that, look, you are basically treating an individual and taking that individual on the verge of basically dealing with untouchability, and at the same time, that individual's right to life is not only being able to breathe in and breathe out, it is also being able to live with a certain amount of dignity. So that dignity is also hampered when you have that individual being excommunicated without any head or tail. So if you give that much right to the head of the organization, that is the Dai, if the Dai is given that much amount of power, then it infringes on the individual rights. So that is why here we have to understand that any fundamental right that we talk about, be it the protection or the religious freedom that we are talking about, or any kind of right that we talk about, there always has to be a balance between the individual rights as well as the rights of the community. The rights which are provided to a community, they stand on the basic bulwark where the individual is also strengthened. The individual is also empowered. Okay? So that is where this case will now be taken up by the larger bench of the Supreme Court for reconsideration. And when the Supreme Court will take it for reconsideration, I'm sure all of these arguments will be opened up again. And this article basically suggests the judges to look into the Chief Justice's dissent note and thereby take the case forward. So in this article, what is it that we have looked into? We have first of all looked into the case of the Dawoodi Bohra community, first of all when it went to the Supreme Court way back in 1961. Now, what was the judgment made by the Supreme Court at that point of time? The Supreme Court, in a 4:1 judgment, whereby 4 of them, they agreed with the judgment, and 1, that is the Chief Justice, he issued a dissent note, whereby, as per this 4:1 judgment, which was arrived at, the Dai, that is the head of the community, was given the power to excommunicate any individual, and thereby that judgment held the Bombay Excommunication Act 1949 as null and void. However, Justice A.S. Oka on 10th of February 2023 referred the case to a larger bench for reconsideration on what factors the reconsideration has to take place. That is again something we have looked at. What kind of questions can be asked from that? We'll take a look at the end, but broadly the questions which can be asked will be with regards to the balancing of the individual rights to the group rights and the community rights. It can be phased out, it can be twisted in any particular aspect, but the basic DNA of this will remain the same, and that is why it is relevant for you to remember the case names as well. Okay? Now, Ravi Kumar, you have a question. What about the excommunication by the village panchayat in village if someone... Yeah, so excommunication happens in the case of villages as well, right? But in that case, the village panchayat or the panch, sarpanch, he has not got that constitutional right. So wherever if that is carried out, it is absolutely unconstitutional, and a case can be lodged, an FIR can be lodged in this case. Okay? Then another question I'll take, what is dissent? No, dissent is basically when you don't agree with the majority opinion. That is dissent, right? And by whom social boycott is done and why? The social boycott is basically done but because of various factors, because of various conditions. Conditions can be ranging from the fact that you are not true to your religious tenets, you are in a way following certain pathways which are not perfectly social or not as per the norms of the society, so you can be boycotted in that case. Okay? So these are the cases. And 2016 Bombay Act, Gargi, basically it talks about and it aims to protect people from social ostracization. Ostracization, again, where basically you are excommunicating an individual or where you are boycotting an individual, you don't maintain contact with that individual, you don't carry out businesses with that individual, you don't give that individual a place to live, you don't make that individual a participant in social religious gatherings, and in all means and practices, that individual mentally and physically is banned from that particular grouping or gathering or society. Okay? Now, then we come to the next article. The next article, which will be relevant for your GS paper 3, right? It talks about Indo-US space cooperation, from handshake to a hug. Now here, let me tell you that when you take a look at these articles, without reading in significant detail in itself, you will get to know the tone and the tenor of the article. The article talks about from handshake to a hug. Means what? How to increase the better relationship that prevails or the better cooperation that should exist between India and US when it comes to space cooperation. Now, space is one of those frontiers which the entire world is exploring at breathtaking pace. Now here, if we take a look at the context and the background of it, why are we discussing this? So there is a reason why this has appeared in the newspaper. India and United States agreeing to advance space collaboration in several areas under the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technology umbrella. Critical and emerging. So the newer technologies which are going to be very, very important and very relevant for developing space flights and further space missions, including human space exploration and commercial space partnership, comes at a crucial time for both the countries. Why for both the countries? Because both the countries are on verge of taking the next leap forward when it comes to the space race and space exploration. India in itself has been seeking to launch a human space flight, and that is now slated to happen later this year or early next year. And that is the mission named as Gaganyaan. Under the program of Gaganyaan, India basically aspires to put its astronauts into space after 1984. That is, Rakesh Sharma was the first individual who went to space on board a foreign spaceship. But now the effort and the endeavor has to be Atmanirbhar and develop your own space vehicle to achieve the same. So that is why critical and emerging technologies are relevant to India. Why is it relevant for United States at this point of time? As we'll take a look later on, United States has also embarked upon the next leg of the space journey. How? Basically, now United States, along with a certain group of countries, they have decided to explore the space beyond the moon. Because till now, majority of the space activities that you see being conducted by the various different countries, various different space organizations, you will find that most of them are indulged in launching of satellites, and that too in the low Earth orbits. So, the first time when humans set foot on the moon was way back in 1969. And now, we don't have adequate technology available to take human back to the moon. So that is what United States is working upon, to establish a kind of a human connect on the moon, whereby again you will be able to transport people very easily on the moon and take moon as a platform for further space launches, whereby then we can explore areas such as Mars and the regions beyond also. So that is why United States is also embarking on a new journey. India is also embarking on the next phase of space exploration, where in India we have had a lot of expertise in launching the small satellites. You would have heard that the PSLV of ISRO, which is also referred to as the workhorse of ISRO, that is famed across the world for low-cost satellite launches and a variety of different satellite launches that it has carried out over the years. But now, ISRO is again planning to reach for the stars, reach for the sun, and reach for Mars and beyond. Now, again, if we analyze this, there are certain limitations to this cooperation, certain limitations which exist to this agreement. Now, what are the limitations? Why is it that the space cooperation between India and United States is not working exactly as it was thought to be or as it was envisioned to be? There must be certain reasons behind that. So let us take a look at it. The first is, there is a gross and a significant mismatch in the two nations' interest in the outer space. Both the nations, that is India and United States, they have different interests altogether. For example, when we talk about a country like India, still we are in that nascent stage of space exploration. Still, our emphasis is to launch as many satellites as possible in order to understand our climate better, in order to understand our terrain better, in order to understand the mineral deposits in a better way. The satellites being launched by India are also serving the basic military requirements. Overall, we have close to around 60 to 70 operational satellites that you can see, right, that India operates. So India, as of now, is working really hard to catch up to the level of our nearest competitor or our nearest neighbor, so to say, China. China, in a way, has taken a significant leap ahead of India in that space race, and we are trying to catch up. Whereas when you think about United States has been looking beyond this activity of launching satellites. In fact, United States has got a significant amount of increased capability, whereby the private sectors are also getting involved in that space launches. And there the endeavor is to reach the Mars, to explore the stars, to explore the gravitational waves, and so on. So the interests are very varied. So that makes cooperation a bit difficult. Also, to add on to that, we have a significant asymmetry in capabilities. That is, the capabilities of India and United States when it comes to space launches, they are nowhere similar. For example, if you take a look at India, In 1 year, that is if you consider last year, we launched close to around 15 to 20 satellites into space, indigenous satellites that I am talking about. Whereas in United States, if you consider the private organization SpaceX, right, you would have heard about the organization SpaceX owned by Elon Musk. SpaceX in itself managed to launch close to around 60 satellites into space in the previous year. While India has got no expertise in building international space stations and so on, United States on its way and on its part has involved so many private institutions, so many private organizations and companies. Thereby, they are planning to replace almost the entirety of the modules of the International Space Station by as early as 2030. So obviously, the capabilities are very, very different. So that is why here you will find that both organizations, they rarely agree on the fact that what is going to be the next agenda, what is going to be the next goal. Imagine you along with your roommate, you are studying for the examination. You as a beginner, you have no clue about the subjects at all. What are these subjects? And your roommate on the other hand is a veteran who has given 2 interviews, is appearing for the 3rd interview. So your priority and your roommate's priority will be completely different. So in those cases, collaboration is slightly possible, but a kind of a complete cooperation is very, very difficult. So that is a similar situation. If you have to put an analogy to it, absolutely if you have to put it, then this analogy suits the case. So that is why disagreements on how best to govern space activities on the moon and other celestial bodies is also one of those sticking points. Now, what can be done if we have disagreements, if both of them have varying opinions, varying views? What can be done moving ahead into the future? So basically, the standard solution to induce long-term cooperation is to ensure cooperation and engagement at the level of the academia, that is the institutions that you have, also the various different private organizations that you have, the ISRO and NASA, that is the main space organizations of the country. So that engagement should continue, right? Maybe we develop a critical technology which helps us 5 years, 10 years ahead into the future, and immediate fructification would not be possible, but a long-term or a medium-term goal is at hand, then that engagement will always come in handy. Then, specialized projects such as the NISAR mission that NASA and ISRO have launched together. We'll take a brief look at NISAR mission again. So basically, this is a unique mission where NASA and ISRO, they have come together to study about the ground and any changes that happen on the surface. Then a partnership between state and private entities that you have, that is very essential, whereby let's say ISRO enters into a partnership with a private company in United States operating in the space sector, or a private company in India. For example, consider Godrej, consider Tata's, them being involved in NASA contracts, etc. That can also be brought about, even though that will have to walk through a lot of acts, a lot of secrecy clauses, which each country holds for themselves. Then, astronaut training program. Now, United States has got very good astronaut training program. In fact, across the globe, United States and Russia, these are the only 2 countries which have got a very standard astronaut training program. In fact, for our Gaganyaan mission, our astronauts have been flown to Russia time and again in order to train for that mission. It is due to that fact that our astronauts have to travel to Russia, and Russia right now is basically entangled in a war with Ukraine. Due to that, there has been a kind of an inordinate delay in the training of the astronauts as well. So when we basically try to send our astronauts maybe to United States, that also reduces our dependency on Russia. And then a consortium led by the government-owned company, which can involve United States private companies as well. So these measures, when they are taken, only then the diplomatic overtures will yield a result. Otherwise, the result is something which will be far-fetched. In the present day and age, when India is embarking upon a new goal for digitization, we need more satellites. We need a better analysis of our own weather conditions, of our own ground surface. And because of that, NASA and ISRO, both of them, they launched that NISAR mission. Now, what was this NISAR mission? By the way, this NISAR mission, why I'm discussing this, this can be relevant for your GS paper 3 in the mains examination, but at the same time, very, very relevant for your prelims examination as well. So please keep an eye out on what is this NISAR mission. So it is a kind of a radar, right, which will be launched, whereby with the help of multiple frequencies, you will be able to study the ground surface to the minutest of the detail, so that even if there is a 1 centimeter movement on the ground surface, it can be caught by the radar. It is a special kind of radar with which we refer to as SAR, or synthetic aperture radar. So that synthetic aperture radar which is being developed, one band frequency will be developed by ISRO, another band frequency will be developed by NASA, and then together it will carry out its study. In the recent Turkey earthquakes that you would have read the news articles about, you would have heard about the news story that the ground has shifted. How do we know whether the ground has shifted slightly or not? It is with the help of these particular kind of radars. So that is why, even if there are changes on our planet's surface less than a centimeter across, the radar, it basically is able to catch that. So it is also going to help us understand Earth's surface and the changing Earth's interior. Also, Earth's cold region, for example, this particular radar, one side of it will study the cryosphere, or the frozen areas in Antarctica, and how they are changing the terrestrial ecosystems, whether they are undergoing any particular change or not, and the availability of water resources. So it can be a significant boost for a country like India, where we do need to map out each and every individual resources, but at the same time, it will increase our understanding for the geographical and the geological phenomena spanning across the globe. Because if you observe, there's a kind of an interrelation. You will find that for the past few years, that is for the past 2 to 3 years, there has been an unprecedented surge in volcanic activities, especially across the Pacific and also across the Mediterranean. Now, across the Mediterranean, now we have experienced a kind of a debilitating and a devastating earthquake in Turkey, right? So it is because of the plates on the Earth's surface which are moving. So it is very, very important to catch even the minutest movement of these plates, so that we are able to analyze whether any devastation or destruction or a disaster is going to lie in front of us, or if a region is stable or not. So that is why this is relevant. Now, remember I told you that NASA and ISRO, they are moving on a very different pathway for its future. NASA and United States in general basically has reached into an Artemis Accord, under which NASA had recently launched its Artemis mission. So what was this Artemis Accord? Again, relevant for your prelims. Right? So here, it was established in 2020, whereby the number of founding members were 8, but now that has increased. And this talks about how we have to increase our presence in space and also go beyond the moon, explore Mars and the stars again. And as per the mission and the various objectives that NASA set in the 70s and the 80s, whereby it had launched the very significant Voyager missions which traveled across the solar system, NASA is basically aiming to revive the same, establishing moon as a source for next generation of space race and space exploration. So that is again relevant when it comes to the future course which will be followed by NASA and United States. Okay? So in this article, we have discussed why the cooperation is suffering a slight drawback, or in a way, a slow speed, so to say, for implementation. What can be the solution? What is the NISAR mission? What is the Artemis Accord? by NASA and by United States. All that we have looked at. It is relevant both for your prelims as well as for your mains examination. Okay? Now, then coming to the next topic, and that next topic is with regards to GS paper 3, that is economy, right? Okay, a question in that is, are there any plans India's own space station? No, as of now, India doesn't have a plan for its own space station. That again has or requires a very different priority levels. And can we predict early earthquake? Basically, see, once you are able to detect the movement on the ground surface, a detailed geological study will also help you understand whether the plates are moving quite considerably or not, and the tensions built based upon your study of the interior of the earth. So yes, you can deduce that areas which are prone to earthquake and how prone they are in the near future. That is something you can be able to deduce. Okay? Now, here, in this article for economy, which has appeared in page 7 of the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper, here it talks about the fact that the service firms, that is the service sector, is on recovery path, whereby manufacturing is still a concern. Now here in this article, please understand that you don't have to remember the data pointers. It happens many of the times when we look at an article, immediately the first instinct is memorize and chug in as much data as possible. No. So in this article, I want you to just observe and follow the trend rather than mugging up the data pointers. So we shall very quickly be glancing upon these trends as well. So what is the context? Why are we discussing this? What is it all about? So it is the view of the economy as looked upon by RBI's Consumer Confidence Survey conducted across 19 major cities in Jan 2023. This gives an idea about the trend in economic conditions across the country and gives you an idea about what really is happening in people's lives and across the various sectors of the economy beyond the headlines that you see in your newspapers and beyond the headline inflation numbers and so on. It also tells you about the perspective that people have about the future of the economy. So this survey which is conducted at an individual level, is conducted at an industry level, and is conducted at the level of the banks to look at the loans which are dispersed as well. So if you analyze this survey, first of all, this deals with the individual level. Individual level. Right. So here, let us analyze these surveys that you see on the screen and let us try to understand what this survey tells us about. So if you take a look at chart 1A, it talks about the opinion of the people who think that the economic situation in the country has worsened or has basically deteriorated. So here, if you will observe, only around 52% they feel that the conditions have deteriorated. So in a way, that shows a decline. Means what? It means that a couple of years earlier, that is in 2022, 2021, even in 2020, a lot more people, they thought that the economic condition has worsened. But now people think that the economic condition is improving. So a less number of people think that the economy has worsened, but still it is more than 50%. Similarly, that here close to around 50% of the people, they also believe that the employment scenario, has worsened. That is, the number of jobs which are available, that is decreasing, right? So close to around 50% have given the opinion that employment scenario has worsened. But here, if you analyze the trend, here also you will observe that the number of people who feel so, that number is coming down. So more people are turning out to be positive about the employment scenario as well. And similar is the case with the decrease of income level, whereby when you talk about price, the price, those people who feel that the price levels have increased, that is almost consistent, almost 93.6%. So while at an individual level people feel that the economy has become better slightly, employment opportunities are slightly more available, where they feel that the income level is coming back to the earlier scenario, but still by this survey you get an overwhelming problem, that is inflation. And when you have so many people attributing to inflation, that inflation can be basically attributed to food inflation. And it is only in the case of food and fuel inflation when you will find so many overwhelming majority of the population saying or talking about price rise. So why is it that fuel inflation is happening? We have discussed about the commodity prices going up because of the uncertainties in the global situation right now. And as the fuel prices go up, the food prices also go up because of transportation cost involved, the cost of the raw materials involved, etc. That is also moving up. However, with the impending harvests coming in the case of the Rabi season, where we are expected to make a greater output as compared to the previous year, from the month of March, April and so on, this inflation is supposed to slightly moderate itself. Okay? So what do you extract from this place? That inflation is a raging concern, and that makes it very important for you to understand why inflation is happening as of now. Then, the new orders received by the manufacturing companies. So here again, if you will observe that the new orders, when we talk about the manufacturing companies, the new orders received, they have reduced, right? And then slightly they have shown an uptick in the last quarter of the previous year. So they have basically shown an uptick, but basically the new orders have been reducing for some time. While the uptick is something which is very encouraging, but at the same time, it highlights the importance and gives you an idea about the capacity utilization which is going on in the production centers. So if you don't have enough number of new orders coming in, the companies will be forced to lay off people. And when the companies they lay off people, unemployment rises, which in a way, with the rise of unemployment, what happens? Their purchasing power reduces. The number of things that they can buy from the market, that undergoes a sharp decrease. And when that purchasing power decreases, automatically the demand decreases, and again the new orders will fall down further. So it is a kind of a vicious cycle that we can enter into unless and until a stimulus is received in these order scenario. And also the quarter-on-quarter growth has largely remained the same in the case of the manufacturing sector. Having said that, when you take a look at the survey with regards to the service sector turnover and the infrastructure turnover, basically you will see that both are moving upward. So the service sector here includes what? The hotel industry, the restaurant business, the banking, insurance, airline sector, airline or the aviation sector, which is showing an increase in the passenger growth rate by almost around 20-22%. Hotel industry, everything is growing at a breathtaking pace, right? And infrastructure is aided by what? Is aided by public spending, public capital expenditure. What do we mean by public capital expenditure? Basically, the government is investing in infrastructure. So it will have a long-term impact and long-term benefit in the case of the economy. Okay? Now, then the last chart that you see in that, here you will find that this is a chart which represents the loans which have been taken up by the various different companies belonging to the various sectors. So as per the study of the loans, you get an idea that the demand for loan in the agriculture, manufacturing and retail sectors recorded a downturn, whereas there was a major uptick in service sector and infrastructure sector. So in a way, while service and infrastructure sector, they are looking up, you will have a tough time for the agriculture and the manufacturing sector going ahead. You have to understand that manufacturing sector will form the bulwark and the base for providing employment to more number of people. Agriculture also is relevant because directly or indirectly we have more than 50% of the population indulged in agriculture. So when you have lesser uptake of credit in the case of the agricultural sector, that means you have more rural issues coming your way. Now, this is RBI's survey. This is not the economic survey. So this RBI survey is basically carried out, and the government also takes a look at it very carefully and very keenly. Because, for example, suppose the government comes to understand that the manufacturing sector is not growing significantly quarter on quarter, they can take some easy measures. They can reduce the rates if possible. And there again, they have to keep in mind that inflation is a major issue. So that is why that balancing needs to be done. For agriculture, they can announce further incentives, further support, but at the same time, the positive news is that the service sector, which provides a large amount of employment, and so does the infrastructure sector, because once the infrastructure sector goes, construction activities go up, and automatically the newer employments are generated. So that is where it is a positive news. Okay? Now, then, the next article, again dealing with GS paper 2, and that is the demand for a greater Tipraland by TIPRA Motha. So right now, Tripura as a state is in much discussion, much debate because of the impending elections, the state elections which have been announced. There's a lot of election sloganeering, there is a lot of election campaign which is going on. While I don't advise you to follow all these political news, you have to understand that certain important points, they emerge out of this churn. And one of the important points which have gained a lot of imagination and which have captured a lot of imagination in Tripura particularly is the demand for greater Tipraland. So what is it? And why are we discussing it? So first of all, here, the newest political party in Tripura, that is the TIPRA Indigenous Progressive Regional Alliance, that is TIPRA, floated in 2019 by the last surviving son of the last king, that is the Pradyot Bikram Manikyade Burma, has created a flutter with its demand for a greater Tipraland. And thereby, that demand is something which has been doing the rounds before the election. So here we will try to understand what is this demand of that greater Tipraland. Okay, so basically what the demand is, they want the center to carve out separate state under Article 2 and 3 of the Constitution. The center has got the power to carve out new states, and that is given under Article 2 and 3. We'll take a look at it in the next slide itself. And here, basically, if you want to understand the aspect and the demography of Tripura, amongst the 19 notified scheduled tribes in Tripura, the Tripuris, that is the TIPRA and the TIPRASAs, are the largest. As per the 2011 survey, they have a population of close to around 6 lakh. Then that is followed by the Riang community, which has a population of around 1.8 lakh. And then the Jamatiyas, which have a population of close to around 83,000. These tribes and the names, because this is important and this is in discussion so much, so these names will be relevant for your prelims. Okay, many of the times you get surprised that where UPSC is asking questions about the tribes, it is from these articles where UPSC churns out the questions. Now, as I said, under Article and under Article 2 and 3, the center has got the power. So, under Article 2, the Parliament may by law admit into the Union or establish new states on conditions that it thinks fit. States like Sikkim became a part, and under Article 3, it empowers the Parliament to make law relating to the formation of new states and alteration of existing states. So it is under this power that the demand is being raised, that this new Tipraland has to be established. Now, here you have to understand that in Tripura, almost 68% of the land that has got a significant amount of say under the Autonomous District Council. Now, under Schedule 6 of the Constitution, we have the provision to establish autonomous councils in various different states in order to ensure that the local way of living, the local culture, the traditional rights, they are not infringed upon. So that is why, in order to fulfill the objective, what was the objective? The objective of forming the district council under Schedule 6 is to remove within a short time the material disparities between the advanced and backward sections of the society. How? By ensuring focused development on the backward areas and the backward sections to strengthen the bonds of unity between tribal and non-tribal masses and so on. So the autonomous councils, they have been given some amount of financial powers, some amount of limited judicial powers as well, in order to ensure that their way of life is not hampered. So under the provision of Schedule 6, the Tripura Tribal Areas Autonomous District Council has been established. Now, the council has legislative and executive power, and it covers close to around 68% of Tripura's geographical area. It comprises of 30 members, of which 28 are elected, while 2 are nominated by the governor. Now, it was the election of this autonomous council where this political party, that is TIPRA Motha, that registered a big win. And because of this, the demand for Tipraland has forever been increasing and rising with a significant fervor. While many of them, they term it as a kind of an election gimmick in order to gather more votes. But then you have to understand what that demand is. So the demand for the greater Tipraland as floated, it extends not only to the autonomous district areas, but slightly beyond that region itself. And as the political parties and the political activists say that they want to include members, that is the local community, that is the Tripuris, who are settled in various parts of the country and various parts of the globe, they want to bring them together to help preserve the cultural heritage of Tripura. But why is there a grievance whereby people are demanding a new state? So the reason is that there has been a change in demography since independence. And after independence, if you will observe that the population of tribals, that has come down from around 63.77% to close to around 31%. Right? So there is always a kind of a fear factor that our identity, that will be lost because of the immigrants, the insurgents which are coming from various different areas. In this case, after partition, many people from East Pakistan, they continued to come in up till around 1971. There was a lot of influx, and that has basically changed the demography of that region. Also, to add to the fact, the Manikya dynasty, which has been ruling in that region since the 13th century, right? The present head or the chief of Tipra Motha is also from this dynasty itself. So this Manikya dynasty, the last king, that is Bir Bikram Kishore Dev Burman, the last king basically had reserved some land for the local Tripuris. Now that reserved land has also been taken away, further creating that anxiety amongst the local populace. That is why they want a newer state. They think and they observe and they believe that their economic, social and the cultural factors and traditions will be fulfilled only after the creation of a newer state. Now here from this, the questions which are generally asked are of analysis type. Now in analysis, you have to talk about the smaller states, right? What are the benefits and the disadvantages of the smaller states and establishing smaller states? You have to understand that in many of the cases, the demand for establishment of the smaller state is based upon political ambition. That individual would want that they will be made a political head of that particular smaller state which is established. So political ambitions aside, smaller states, they help you in a way of achieving administrative efficiency, etc. But at the same time, you also have to examine that Tripura is not a very large state. Tripura in itself is a small state. So just by dividing that state and forming a Tipraland, Does that mean that the local people will benefit? Or is this another electioneering gimmick? That is something that we have to analyze moving ahead. And as this issue develops, you will see that slowly and steadily the demand is also being diluted. So the coin is up in the air regarding what will happen once the election results are declared. But one thing is for sure, that once this political party comes closer to the power, their demand is set to become much more vociferous, at least in the next couple of years. Okay? Now, after this, coming to the last topic of the day, that is 4G in name only. This is again relevant for your GS paper 3 as well. Right? So here, very briefly, we'll talk about this, that 4G in name only data needles stutter in grey spots in India. Now, without anything, first of all, related to your own self. Many of the times it would have happened that you would have taken up your phone, it shows 4G connectivity, but even a Google search is not opening up in your phone. I'm sure many of you would have experienced this kind of a frustration. So basically, this article deals with that. Now here, rather than focusing upon the intricacies and the stories included in the article regarding an aggrieved consumer with regards to a particular telecom company, how they complained, and thereby the telecom company said that, okay, the 4G is working there, the speed is not there. So basically, the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India has now necessitated that if you are designating a network as 4G, the minimum speed of 2 Mbps is absolutely required. Right? Now, here, that brings into impact and that brings into light two different areas which are relevant for your prelims perspective. What are white spots and what are gray spots? White spots are those areas where you don't have any telecom connectivity, where the telecom towers don't give you that connectivity. Whereas when we talk about the gray spots, here the connectivity is provided, but the speed or the accessibility is not there. So while the telecom companies, they work significantly and the government also works significantly in elimination of the white spots, it is the gray spots which are increasing ever so largely. And these are developing in the tier 2 cities, tier 2 and 3 cities. In the metropolitan cities, you have various companies, various providers, they are able to provide the best of the services. But then the conditionality deteriorates as you start going into the smaller cities and then into the hinterland. Now, yes, there are gray spots. Now the question might arise in your mind that, okay, there are gray spots, but at least people are able to communicate, people are able to talk with each other. So what is the concern all about? This brings about a kind of a digital divide. Digital divide in the sense that few people who are living in certain cities, they are also paying the same amount for that 4G network as, let's say, I am or you are living in a tier 2 or a tier 3 town. So while we are spending the same amount of money, we are not getting the same services. So someone living in a metropolitan city will be able to stream any video services endlessly without any interruption. Someone living in a tier 2 or a tier 3 city will be facing a lot of issue, and that inaccessibility will lead to a digital divide. So that is the major problem. So here, as per the new definition of broadband, the TRI, that is the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, has mandated a minimum 2 Mbps speed. Earlier, what used to happen is that you had all the companies, if you take a look at the overall telecom providers, basically almost 95% of the subscriber base, they say they have the broadband, but the connectivity is in front of you. So here, the implication of it is on digital divide. Digital divide, that too based upon economic exploitation. Because if you are paying the same money, you deserve the same services. And that means impact on education, impact on healthcare services, impact on navigation, and so on. So that is the digital divide we have to be mindful of. This digital divide is not because of lack of equipments, lack of willpower. This is because of the telecom companies not serving what they promise. So that is something which we will, and that is where we will conclude the discussion for the day. I hope that overall the discussion was meaningful and fruitful for you guys. Let us take a quick look and a quick glance at the practice questions. The first question: rights of individuals form the core principle of rights enjoyed by religious groups. Analyze the statement with the relevant Supreme Court judgment. So in this article, in the introduction, you have to talk about what do you mean by the rights of groups, what do you mean by rights of individuals. 25-30 words, finish the introduction, then initiate the discussion about where does the right of groups come in, what do we mean by Article 26? Give the example of Article 25. Article 25 deals with the freedom of religion at the individual level. 26 deals with the freedom at the group level. So that is something you have to discuss. You can discuss the Dawoodi Bohra community case of the Supreme Court and the kind of a referral to the larger bench again. Then the second question: India-US space relations need a recalibration and a rethink based upon pragmatism, that is reality, right? In the above context, discuss the issues and the way forward. So here in the introduction, talk about the prospect that India and United States, both of them are marching into the new age and they are thinking about increased collaboration. And after introduction, initiate with the kind of collaboration which is happening. You can give the example of Nisar. Then you can talk about the aspect of the limitations, the solutions in a form of way forward. And in the conclusion, you can always talk about that these two democratic pillars of the world, it is absolutely essential for them to collaborate in the next generation of space exploration for the betterment of humankind. That is how you can conclude on a positive note. So that is where I'll end the session, slightly elongated, but I hope the session was meaningful to you. If you like the session, please don't forget to click on the like, subscribe, and the share button, and also give us your comments regarding the session itself. Thank you, and have a good day.